Yo, I'm just trying to make pimping my stuff a little bit more fun. So I have a YouTube channel, which is where you're probably watching this. That's Postmortem Video. I have a second channel called Grimstream. It's not got the proper name yet, but if you search for it, you should find it. And if you're trying to stop sucking at the teat of YouTube, you can always head on over to BitChute and find me at Grim Jim. James Wallis, or Jamie Wallis, should be familiar to a lot of you. He's a reasonably big name in the role-playing community. One time ran Hogshead Publishing. One of the major players, particularly in the indie RPG scene. And many of his indie games have done pretty well and had a lasting impact and awareness on the landscape of independent RPG design. I'd say Baron Munchausen, perhaps in particular, is it a role-playing game? Is it a story game? Is it a party game? It kind of blurs the lines between them all. And that's kind of Jamie's thing outside of his more conventional work, is kind of blurring the lines and doing odd things and playing around with expectations and systems and all the rest of it. So a while back he had a Kickstarter for a game called Alas Vegas, and wanting to support, under-supported game designers, I backed it. That's where I got my copy. Took quite a while to get, a bit late, not as bad as some, but he came through in the end. But like too many games, this is a rather difficult one to review. The system is extremely short, mostly simple, and really only takes up the first 30 pages or so, minus introduction and other bits and pieces. Much of the bulk of the rest of the book is adventures, for want of a better term, scenarios, plays in 4 acts that you can go through. And normally, to my thinking, scenarios are largely a waste of time, because they tend to be rather restrictive, they tend to be rather railroaded, and they don't have much in the way of reuse value. And then there's a few essays and things loosely collected on the theme of Vegas by a few other game designers. Furthermore, the system is available under Creative Commons, and you can get the system for free. So how do you review such a thing? Because if I review the scenarios, it's going to spoil them, and you might play them. Scenarios tend to be low value, but given the nature of the system of this game, scenarios are really the meat of it. It's really tricky. But let's start with the system, which you can grab for free without the additional material. The whole game is set around the premise, no matter what kind of setting and so on that you use, of Hollywood style amnesia. That is, waking up with your physical body, and pretty much that's it. Maybe a vague idea of the direction you want to head in with your character, but nothing's set in stone, and things get revealed as you go along. So you get flashbacks, and that allows you to recover certain abilities or whatever that you've forgotten, but which define your character. Some of those will be defined by you, some of those will be defined by the other players, some of them will be defined by the games master, who is called the dealer, because it's going with the whole Vegas gambling thing and just kind of running with it, really. So when you create a character, all you really get to do is draw a major arcana card, which is called your signifier card. It doesn't have to have anything to do with your character or inspire your character or anything like that, but it can if you want it to, and certainly that's a useful character prompt. But otherwise, all you really get is to describe yourself. That's really it. Your physical description, maybe the sound of your voice, that sort of thing. Another player will also describe something. Like the idea is that you don't necessarily remember everything about yourself, so another player can define something for you, like you have a big scar on your back or something like that. And this just gives you a kind of vague idea, a vague description, a vague possibility of where your character can go. but you don't know who you are, and that becomes unveiled through play. You gain abilities, that is, arenas of skill, and they're binary, they're either on or off. There's not really much degree of granularity in the system. You get those through flashbacks. You can trigger your own flashbacks, 1 per session, 2 during the first session. Another player can include you in their flashback, which will give you access to an ability. Flashbacks get triggered when your signifier card comes up through the course of normal play, or the dealer can tell you when you have a flashback and can give you a related ability that's something to do with that. And that's how your character develops, that's how you develop skills and so on, how you move forward as a character and how your character becomes defined. This is something that's been played around with in other games, but it's absolutely key and central to Alas Vegas. So you're probably not going to be necessarily able to take this system and translate it to use as a more general system. It's so tied to that idea of a character unfolding before your eyes and a limited adventure run in 4 acts typically, that it's not a system that's particularly translatable to other contexts, so it has limited utility on that basis. And it's also intimately tied to scenario, because at the end of 4 acts, whether that's sessions or whatever else, that's when your character is its full competence, probably, without becoming too competent, and can face up to the challenge of whatever it is that the scenario is about. When it comes to applying the system, it runs using a tarot deck. I happen to have one handy because I'm a gamer with a vague interest in the occult. So there's basic actions, which are things that anyone can just do or perhaps not do depending on the contextual situation, i.e. you can get up and you can walk across the room, right? It doesn't need a test, doesn't need any challenge or anything, but if you're tied to a chair, then maybe that becomes more difficult. There are skilled actions, which are things that either require luck or skill or persistence, or something like that, something where there's an element of chance or a requirement of expertise, that sort of thing. Like, say, driving a car, right? That's not a skill everyone is born with. It's not something a natural, naked, born human with no memories can do. You'd have to remember how to drive, right? So you might have to make a basic skill challenge on that. And then there are contested actions, which have their own system, and that's you against another person. So basic actions succeed or fail basically under GM fiat. Skilled actions, skilled isn't perhaps the right term, but it's the one he used, I guess. Challenging actions might be a better way to put it. When those happen, you draw a card. If you're skilled in that arena and you draw a major arcana card, then you automatically succeed. If you're not skilled in that area and you draw a major arcana card, you automatically fail. Otherwise, difficulties run 2 to 12. I think that should be 2 to 11, because you can't typically draw a 12 under the numerical values he's given the cards. But yeah, otherwise it's difficulty 2 to 12. If you draw a card that equals or exceeds that, then you succeed, otherwise you fail. Now the tarot cards, aces count as 1 to 11, face cards as 10, 2 to 10 cards count as 2 to 10. Major arcana, which only counts in contested actions, are 10 or the number on the card. So that gives you some idea of the probabilities. Now when you're in a contested action, you play blackjack against each other, or against the person that's challenging you, or the thing that's challenging you, whatever the case might be. If you're skilled, you get an additional card that you can choose to swap in or not, so that gives you your advantage. And then you play, and whoever wins. So whoever gets closest to 21, and depending what combination of cards you have and how rare that combination is, that determines your level of success. So that's really it so far as the system goes. Now, you've heard me complain about this a lot lately, especially when it comes to indie systems, but they lack granularity. They lack the capability for choices to make fine distinctions. So in this, equipment, weapons, things like that make zero difference, and you either have a skill or you don't. There's no degree of capability when it comes to having skills. You just either have the ability or you don't, and there's no raw physical capabilities. I guess abilities as a whole might describe that. So you could have uncommon strength as an ability, or doctorate in medicine, but that wouldn't make you any better at medicine than someone with first aid, except again by GM fiat. So it just lacks that granularity. Now, that's not so much of a problem in the scenarios as they're envisioned, because they're limited run and this kind of speciality doesn't really come into it. But for me, I like to be able to make meaningful choices, to prepare, to make my character better in more ways than either on or off. That's one of my major beefs with D&D since 4th edition. 4th edition and 5th edition both do it. You either have a proficiency or you don't, and that gives you a flat bonus, or it doesn't. You can't have degrees of skill, if you choose to invest in that particular area, and this has the same kind of issue. But for what it does very well. It's not satisfying to me due to my peculiarities and desires about the system. For you, it might be better, and it certainly has a better system than certain other narrative-like systems that I've reviewed recently. So there's scenarios. Now, because the system is so simple and because it's so story-focused, those have more value than they would under a normal system. If you're playing something like D&D, then typically a system, an adventure, doesn't have a lot of of repeat value, right? Resale value, I was going to say. Because once you've played through the adventure, that's pretty much it. Maybe you can half-inch some monsters or something from it, or some traps that you particularly like. But once you've played through an adventure, it's just dead weight on your bookshelf, by and large. And I tend to find published adventures to be rather unsatisfying, railroady. They just don't take into account player creativity. I mean, how could they? There's just no real possibility of doing that. And I'm always constantly searching for a way to make adventures more useful, either by including additional material that has greater use beyond the adventure, or by structuring the adventure in a loose enough way that there's more emphasis on improvisation and so on. In this, though, the adventures that you have, they're pretty good, and they show the range of these kind of amnesiac things. The added value, though, is probably really added with some sort of generic ideas based around gambling or around Vegas that you can then import into other games. So things like it sounds stupid, but recipes for cocktails. You don't necessarily, if you don't go out and you drink lots of cocktails, or you weren't around in 1950s Vegas, you might not know what they had then. You might not know how to make a drink, and maybe you want to make a theme night of it and have cocktails at the table. I highly recommend that. And simpler systems are easy to run when you're drunk. And there's a few other essays, things like incorporating gambling in your games, that sort of thing. So there is some added value, but considering only 30 pages or so of an A5 book, a system, and that there's nearly 330 pages to the book, a lot of that is stuff that you're never going to reuse, and that's hard to justify. I have no regrets. If you like indie games and you like really focused games, if you enjoy something like Lady Blackbird or whatever, then I think you'll really enjoy this. But it's just not quite for me. I could see myself doing scenarios for it, but I can't see myself playing it with people particularly. I mean, it's interesting from a creator viewpoint, but from a player viewpoint, I think I would just end up frustrated playing Las Vegas. So the scores, which is all you guys really care about, I'm sure. Style-wise, the presentation is very basic. It doesn't live up to the glitz and glamour of the subject material, though the tarot card pages are very nice. It's an indie production, which we have to keep in mind, but even so, I think the presentation could have conveyed the setting a bit better. So I'm going to give it overall an average of 3 points for style. And when it comes to substance, this is really tricky because, like I say, adventures don't have a lot of reuse, so they're not particularly substantial in the way that more sort of guidelines and advice would be. But this does include guidelines and advice and additional content and essays from important game designers as well, so there is substance there, but it's not like every single page is useful. So let me think. Given the issues, I can't give it a 5 out of 5 for substance, and it's not my thing, but I can see how it could be substantial for other people. So all things considered, I think I have to give it a 4 for substance. So 3 for style, 4 for substance. That's 7 out of 10, or 3.5 stars out of 5. And I know I score harshly, but I actually, 3 is average for me. Okay, so slightly above average. Worthwhile for the essays and so on, particularly if you're a game designer, and also worthwhile picking up to examine the system, but you can get that for free. So yeah, go ahead and do that. Zang. Old Fat Punks is part caper, part comedy, part nostalgia, and part commentary. It follows 3 aging punks as they build themselves up for one big, nihilistic last hurrah. You can buy Old Fat Punks at Amazon, Drive-Thru Fiction, or Lulu.com. Follow the links below or search on those sites.